Right. That is fine enough, Johann Sebastian. This is John McNertney here. Hola, boa tarde. Hopefully, you are well wherever you are at in the world. Hopefully, you are in my time zone. Or maybe not, because it's nice and early in the day for you. And maybe it is not dreadfully hot as it is in Lisbon, Portugal today. So, anyways, good afternoon or good morning once again. John McNertney here, and I am coming to you live if it is 6 o'clock in the London time zone. And we are going to be talking about one of the epic matchups, Spain and Portugal. How in the world does one attack a subject like this? It's like talking about Canada and the United States of America. So different, but also so similar in so many ways. So I'm going to take you through what I hope to be an interesting, I hope, 30 minutes that compares these two countries from the perspective of a aspiring retiree. So before I get started, a few housekeeping issues. Number one, as always, our lawyers have asked us to provide you with these written disclosures that we are not providing you with de facto investment advice. This is not the codex of ultimate wisdom here, folks. It is just one financial planner's take on a thorny question, which is how do we do this thing called retirement? So this presentation will be available to you. I want to point out specifically today that we have a very full outline to get through. And because of that, I have actually made the decision to leave a few slides to the side. In other words, I'll be skipping them and I won't be apologizing like I usually do. I usually say, I'm so sorry, but I'm not sorry in advance because there is actually quite a lot to talk about when one considers Spain versus France. So, as always, please ask me for these files. I've got the PDF right here on my desktop. I will zip it over to you in a heartbeat. In a bata de coração, como diz meus amigos aqui no Portugal. So put it, John. What am I, if not a financial planner first? So if you don't know me, hello. I'm from the great state of California, San Francisco specifically, which is where my practice is located. So I started this particular company in 2022. Before I came to work here, I made lots of other stop-offs at Merrill Lynch, TD Ameritrade, and a host of other places. Before I decided to do this at Green Ocean, I have a BS. I always have to giggle at that, in psychology from the University of Iowa, with minors in philosophy and in French, and I hold a certified financial planning designation. And currently I live in Lisbon, Portugal, and sometimes, increasingly less, in San Francisco, California. And the reason for that is my people live here. My family lives here, and my friends increasingly also live em Portugal. Mas hoje, today we're going to talk about Portugal and Spain. So by way of introduction, we have the eponymous rooster, which has a slightly different personality, I think, if he's saying ole to welcome the day versus bom dia. The bom dia is the sossegado, the tranquilidad of Portugal. And so why do we choose to live in Portugal? My family loves it because Lisbon's beautiful. The Algarve is gorgeous, although very hot this time of year. And the Douro Valley, I just recently visited, also spectacular. And this turkey is the less feisty of the two turkeys because, or chicken, roosters rather, because Spain is known for being a little bit more boisterous. It has bigger cities, right? I have seen in the group here a few clients that I work with that lament the fact that Portugal's kind of sleepy compared to Madrid, compared to Valencia, compared to Barcelona and Bilbao. Up in the northern regions. Spain has got an entirely different character in some ways than Portugal does. So, ole, indeed. And so those are some of the surface level differences that we see on postcards, but what are the really noticeable differences between these two countries? And so I thought I would assemble some fun, fast facts. So first of all, um, I'm laughing, but some people ask this question. Now, for those of you in the lobby here, are these two countries really just one and the same? Obviously, uh, no. If you're just learning this today, then congratulations. You're going to learn more than anybody else with us. In fact, not since 1492 were these two countries pretty much connected during the period of time that was known as the Moorish period, during a period of time where Northern Africans governed all of Spain and Portugal, which you can see some evidence of. If you go gallivanting around the countryside, you'll see many, many ancient palaces belonging to these folks. Um, of course, Spain is much more populous with nearly 5 times the people. So you have 50 million, 49 million people in Spain, 10.3 million in Portugal. Shocker. I know. The average life expectancy in both countries is very good. I found these two beautiful gentlemen on Spanish Tinder looking for a date. No, I'm just kidding. But they do look so winsome. But their average age in Portugal and in Spain, respectively, is 81 and 83 years, which is actually really good on a global basis. They have different forms of government, although I sometimes think of these as sort of socialistic countries because of the way they're organized. Spain is actually a constitutional monarchy, so they do in fact have a king, King Ferdinand, as their head of state, which I find fascinating. Whereas Portugal, since it's Liberdade, Momento de Liberdade in the 80s, they've been a constitutional republic with a with a head of state that is not a king. And when you think about these two from a financial standpoint, who is the winner? Of course, Spain has a higher GDP per capita, so we'll give one check mark to Spain. Spain also has a higher unemployment rate than Portugal does. Spain has a 15% unemployment rate today, whereas Portugal has about a 6.9% unemployment rate. So that's one check in the Portuguese category. The minimum wage, yeah, it's not so great in Portugal. The minimum wage is higher in Spain at 1,050 US dollars a month versus the Portuguese 700. So that's a check mark for Spain. But of course, what we care about the most, don't we? Which has a higher tax rate? Does anybody know the answers to that one? I'm going to open up the chat and see who knows. Where do you think you're going to pay higher taxes? We all know that it's going to be dun dun dun. Unfortunately, it's Portugal. So Portugal has a slightly higher income tax rate, as well as those pesky dividends and interest tax rates, the stamp taxes across the board. Portugal has a slightly higher tax rate in every category than Spain does. So in our first competition, not that this is going to be competitive, we have Spain in the pole position. Yeah, that's right. I also want to point out, if you have questions, and I hope you do, yeah, we gave the gold star to Spain. If you have questions, please just pop them into the Q&A, and I promise at the end of the presentation, there we go, Q&A. Oh, it showed Portugal. Somebody pointed out that when I did this, I am just a guy who makes mistakes sometimes. It showed that Portugal, that's incorrect. Thank you, David, for pointing out that Portugal actually has a lower minimum wage. It's about $700. Spain has the $1,050 equivalent. You win the first prize there, David. Thank you for catching that. Cultural aspects. The two countries, of course, are Latin countries, and they have a ton in common, just an absolute metric ton. Somebody made a very funny joke. But Spain is fascinating in some of the ways that the United States is fascinating in this. Once you have a larger mass of people, well, then, you're naturally going to have a larger landmass, people can spread out and they can form different kinds of subcultures. And so Spain has quite a bit more cultural diversity. And so 40 to 50% of Catalonians support independence. Did you know that? They have since the medieval days believed of themselves as an autonomous republic, and so there are a lot of Catalonian separatists running around out there going, "We want to be on our own." And the United States occasionally has some of these folks out there. I'm looking at you, Texas. They think that they should be their own state, and they've got some interesting arguments to make. The Basque country is a little bit less noisy these days. Basque separatists used to be some of the most feared sort of domestic terrorists, I think, at a point in history. But they were given some financial autonomy that has actually brought their furor down just a little bit. We had a question, how much higher are taxes in Portugal than they are in Spain? Okay, I'm going to go really deep on that. I'm glad that you asked because that means that you're interested to know all of the gruesome details that I am about to parade before you. I'm going through fast facts right now just to kind of whet our appetite, and then I will try to come in a half an hour, but I'm going to dig deep into the macroeconomics of these two countries. So culturally and linguistically, Portugal's pretty unified. I mean, look at this. Spain has 17 separate comunidades autonomias, 17 states basically is how we would think of them in the United States. They're autonomous communities. And so you have Galicia, which was, as legend has it, the birthplace of Portuguese, actually. And so the Spanish Galicians sound a lot like the Portuguese do. And then all the way on the other side of the country, naturally, you would find a more French influence and even Arabian influence in Catalan. And so I just find it fascinating that it's impossible to compare these two countries because it would be like comparing a state to comparing it to a giant country because the country itself is just so vast. And so the range of tax rates is different across the country as well. So when you dig into it, you will find that each autonomous community in Spain has its own unique tax base in addition to legislative powers, and so Spain is a very loosely gathered republic. The central power does not have total authority over each of these autonomous communities. So at the end of 2021, you had a panorama of tax rates from 45% in Madrid. Madrid being very interesting, it is unique in that it is the only autonomous community where there's not a death tax. And then Valencia, as the locals call it, has its own has the highest tax rate. But you look at that sort of 11-point swing. There's an 11% difference between living in Valencia and living in Madrid, kind of like the difference between living in, say Washington State, California. So when you're thinking about, which of these states that you want to move to, you must take this into consideration, that there are various taxes, legal differences, even among the autonomous communities within Spain. Again, for that guy in the lobby here that wants to talk money, we'll be there in just 1 second, but I love that the climates are slightly different. At a distance, the Iberian Peninsula all looks like one big slab. And there's home right there in Lisbon, Portugal for us. But when you look at the annual rainfall and you look at the average annual temperatures, obviously there is just a broad range of sort of microclimate zones that one can live in Portugal and in Spain. Spain's climate is super diverse, largely because they have lots of mountains. Portugal has mountains as well, but Spain just has more of them, and they're more considerable. Whereas Portugal is relatively mild across the country, with it, of course, being very hot if you head to the southern tip. This is where I'm going to point this out. As I promised, guys, I'm not going to go through every slide in gruesome detail because I don't care as much about the climate and the geography. You can read this. Obviously, both of the countries have similarities and they have a lot to commend themselves. When you think about the languages, there are only about half as many people in the world speaking Portuguese as Spanish, which just speaks to the fact that although Portugal is a beautiful place, there are many more people speaking Portuguese out there in the world, in Brazil, in point of fact. And so both of these beautiful languages, I find Spanish a little bit easier to learn a little bit easier than particularly the Portuguese variant of Portuguese. Um, but that is a question of taste, of course, like so many of these things. The lifestyle is just a little bit different in the two places. The daily schedule is just a bit later in Spain, and the Spanish, on occasion, are also known to take a siesta. And the Portuguese têm uma siesta também. They have their own siesta, but they don't really take it as much, is my understanding. Among my Portuguese friends, they're not taking as many midday breaks as the Spanish still habitually do. Social integration can be hard if you are a loud, brash American, like some people that I know, not in this room, but they have a hard time keeping that voice down and integrating into a culture which is a bit more collectivist by its nature than it is individualist. Americans are known for being among some of the most individual people in the world. Me. I want to look at my superheroes and get my Big Mac, and I want it now. The Portuguese, especially, tends to be a little bit more collectivist and a little bit nicer to one another and less tolerant of being loud and bossy, I guess you could say. Housing options in both of the countries, of course, there is of course the full range. One point to bring up here, I find it interesting that my dream is to live in a Portuguese quinta. They have quintas, of course, as well in Spain, but they have the fincas, the rural farmhouses where you can live the authentic, rustic Spanish country life as well. Um, and of course, buying versus renting is always on my mind as a financial planner. I have helped probably thousands of people at this point in my career find out that buying is generally smarter, even if you're in a foreign country. And probably especially here right now, because the European central banks have kept the interest rates so low that it's even more compelling to buy your property if you can. As I do financial plans, there has been practically no plan that I have looked at where it is financially more reasonable to stay in the rent game than it is to buy your own property. So that is enough to say on that. And I've discussed safety and security before, and I don't think transportation is important enough to talk about uh, today. See, I told you, I just wanted to give you as much for the takeaway slide as possible. All I will say is this, is that yes, the surfing is so unbelievably good in Portugal that I named my company after what my surf coach talked about, the green part of the wave. It is amazing, the surfing in Portugal. In Spain, though, I find that they have actually a broader range of wines than you have here in Portugal. But both countries have fantastic food, culture, historic sites, museums. I'm going to leave this in your capable hands if you'd like this list from me later, because I want to talk about the financial overview. This is, of course, my element where I feel most comfortable. Yes, I actually have a member of our audience here in the lobby who moved to Spain recently and has noted that yes, you can find your very own money pit anywhere in the world. And this person has chosen Castellan, but it's difficult because the taxes are also high. So when I do a financial plan for anybody, financial stability is of course a massive factor in financial plans. In America, we all take for granted a certain degree of financial stability. God knows that's not always 100% the case. But when you're moving to these countries, you kind of have to also look at what's the financial stability of the country itself. Um, I mean, if you can, that should be a high priority, I think, to retire somewhere that's very stable. So when I look at these two countries, as one does from a macroeconomic standpoint, what are these two countries? How healthy are they? And so the GDP growth recently of both countries has actually been pretty good, not surprisingly. On the other side of the pandemic, most countries have been recovering. Spain has been growing by just a little bit more than Portugal, not in a huge way. GDP growth annually over the last few decades has actually been pretty close for these two countries. Now, we do see Portugal usually in second place, although the housing crisis did hit Spain just a little bit harder. The housing crisis in 2008 than it hurt Portugal. If you come from higher and you move lower, that's going to be a bigger ouch than 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 Portugal's still relatively painful experience. GDP per capita, we talked about this already. The average person in Spain is going to feel better off than the average Portuguese resident that is engaging at the same level of their respective economy. And so there's your GDP, 30,000 versus about $25,000 per person in Spain versus Portugal. The GDP growth that has been observed since the late 90s has certainly been much stronger in Spain than it has been in Portugal. I feel the numbers bear this out. In my research for this project, I noticed that the diversity of industries is just so much broader in Spain than it is in Portugal. Portugal, unfortunately, has remained very dependent on tourism, which it has been enjoying a huge boom in for the last few years. But that is, of course, ephemeral if the global economy should take a different turn. So when you look at the GDP across the board, these are by no means unstable inherently. And so what else do we look at? We look at unemployment rates, which generally has favored Portugal. Um, Spain is just a much larger population, and we'll talk about, I think, some of the underlying reasons for this unemployment in a few slides. But this is the case: is just that there has been a much higher unemployment rate in Spain than there is in Portugal. Now, why is that? I mean, you have to point this out in the United States as well. There's labor force participation. So it can be a bit deceptive when you look at the top line numbers because the population that's under 15 is steadily dwindling in Portugal. Portugal has a significant demographic issue on its hands. And so hopefully, I had a client visit me one time. I hope he's here. And he took me out for a beer and he said, I would love to move to Portugal, but the thing is it's loaded with old people. And I said, Larry, you're not a spring chicken. He said, yes, I know. But like the country doesn't feel dynamic. And that is sometimes truly said, is Portugal is definitely a much older country by the numbers. And so when they talk about hating to have immigrants, and yet I'm not going to bring immigration into my call here, but immigration can be very net positive if you know where to put people in your economy. And so when you look at the demographics here, so this list actually stack ranks where we see the most immigration happening. And so you can see Luxembourg in Sweden, Norway, kind of the countries that you would expect to see having a lot of immigration happening because they're the happiest countries around. You see the average European Union immigration statistic comes right in the center of the map here. Spain is just above average. Portugal is not pacing to be a leader, at least in 2017 when this survey was taken, although that has been going up lately. Public debt as a function of GDP, just like good old US of A, public debt has actually gone high and it's remained stubbornly high. But the implied interest rate of that public debt has been going down. Now, this again is just a function of the central interest rate policies in the European Union versus the U.S., which is what I'm, of course, accustomed to. Although I'm in both worlds now. Portugal, just in conclusion, it's been steadily progressing, making huge strides. And in recent years, it has actually taken the top spot as one of the top GDP growth centers. But it's a small country. And so, like all smaller boats in the midst of larger boats, they tend to get rocked one side to the other fairly quickly, whereas Spain can navigate the waters with a bit more confidence and authority. The tourism sector, yeah, major contributor to the economy and employment, and it has significant female labor force participation. Not a statistic that I went after, unfortunately, although I have noticed that between the two countries on a cultural scale, there's a bit more of a matriarchal nature, I think, to Portugal versus the patriarchal nature of Spain. But that's neither here nor there. That's just a personal observation. The cost of living between these two countries is also pretty close together. The average rent is about $740 for a one-bedroom apartment in the middle of Lisbon. Maybe. I think it's been a little bit higher lately. Rent prices are always slightly higher in Spain, or at least they have been. Yeah, I collected these statistics and they're about 2 years old, and I think that housing prices have actually gone. Um, oh, again, I was looking at the wrong category. Silly me. This is probably right. The prices are a little higher in Portugal than they are in Spain. Prices for groceries are a little bit higher in Spain for all foods, I believe. Milk, eggs, etc., are provided as a reference point. But that's been my anecdotal experience as well. Is I've done quite a lot of traveling in Spain, and it always feels like your money just goes a little bit farther in Portugal. Utilities are just kind of a non-issue. I think for my family, I have to be careful. I know we all have different situations, but utilities cost around 100 euros per month all in for energy, gas, water, and even for internet. Internet is exceptional in both countries. And leisure and entertainment is fantastic in both countries. As somebody from one of my friends who came to visit me a few weeks ago, and they said, "Man, I could go to a movie every day of the week this week." I won't because there's not that much good stuff to watch. I think you'll agree, but you could because the tickets are not as expensive as they are back in most of the United States. Health considerations. Are you concerned? Well, you ought to be because health is, of course, it's central to your well-being. Um, Both of these countries has an SNS. Yes, just like they have an IRS, they have a Serviço Nacional de Saúde and a Sistema Nacional de Saúde. And both of these countries has nothing to be ashamed of in terms of both quality and the only thing that I can say about the Portuguese system is that they seem to lack coverage. If you're just relying on the public system, they seem to be overworked and understaffed. Whereas I don't think that that's true for Spain. But both the public and the private systems in both countries have really nothing to be ashamed of, and they seem modern. They seem well staffed. Availability of health insurance in both countries is exactly what you would want it to be. They don't have any issues with uh, pre-existing conditions issues in either country. I've experienced this firsthand and done quite a lot of research on this in Portugal, and I believe that to be the case in Spain as well. Both countries, and this is where I come to think of these countries as socialists, both of them have universal health care. But I have to laugh because most of the world has universal health care, with the U.S. being a bit of the odd man, very expensive odd man out. Um, and I provided a checklist here in case you needed to be reminded of the things to look for when you are assessing your healthcare needs. Tax considerations. This is my second area where I'm going to put a lot of focus because it's a big part of the financial plans that I do for anybody. And as I've said, the income tax rates are very different across the range of autonomous communities in Spain. And so, really, if you're moving to Spain or if you're considering all of your options, zoom in on this because, as was recently pointed out in a Price Waterhouse study that I read for a few hours in preparation for this, the differences between Spanish regions are notable. The community of Madrid and the Canary Islands are two big standouts. So Madrid is actually kind of expensive. The Basque country is expensive. Catalan is expensive. And then the islands, actually in both countries, the islands have some of the lowest tax rates around because I think mainly because tax policy is a cudgel that most governments use to try to affect outcomes. And so the islands end up being far less expensive because people, the countries want to encourage people to go and settle in the islands. Because if you've lived on an island for any length of time, and I have not, but I always take care to talk to people when I'm in Hawaii, the locals are always sort of meh on on living there. Not all of them, but the ones that will talk to me are. Um, And Portugal does, of course, also have a progressive income tax system. This is a page from a live financial plan. It's just interesting to see that 85,000 in taxable income gets you to about a 16, 17% rate in the United States, whereas Portugal is going to get you to 40% pretty darn quick. So both of these countries are actually going to be relatively similar on this point. Um, if you work with a financial planner like myself who does this kind of thing, I have actually created a live calculator which we can now use to successfully compare all of the countries that I've encountered so far. So you've got all of the pigs, Italy, Greece, Spain. Are we not using pigs? I think that's probably derogatory. But you get what I'm saying. Is these all these countries have high taxes, but only relative to a country like the United States. And then once you get over to these countries, they all look fairly the same. They look fairly similar. Capital gains taxes, pretty much equivalent. Only big difference is going to be the wealth taxes that are levied against you in Spain. So above the 700,000 euro exemption line, you are going to see all of Spain, with the exception of Madrid, is going to be taxing you around, well, it actually varies quite a lot. The state taxes you less than 1%, but each of the independent communities can take it up to about 4%, I think, in the most extreme example. I think it's Valencia, once again, has a very high wealth tax. So if you are sitting on a large amount of money, you really want to think this one through very carefully, because even as a non-tax resident, if that were to be your approach to this, were to come to Spain for a period of time that's not great, but to have some investments in Spain, they are going to assess the wealth tax against you. And I don't have the formulas on hand here, but they are not as easily navigable as you might think. So figure that out before making the decision to jump into something you might regret. Tax incentives for retirees. This is pretty much the same now. Now that Portugal has dropped the non-habitual residence designation, although of course they could bring it back. You basically have the lack of tax incentives for retirees. There is a NHR 2.0 that is yet to be totally ratified for Portugal, but that will be a limited form of the NHR designation. And Portugal does have its Beckham law, but the Beckham law is only good for you if you're a working individual and you're working from Spain. So this is tax incentives for retirees. There's not really anything meaningful that I'm aware of, although there are some strategies that we can talk about offline. Specific financial benefits for retirees. Just going to see if I put something here that's worth talking about. And I do not think that between these two countries, I don't think that there is a significant difference. One of the largest significant differences that I have seen is the difference that France presents, in that France is not nearly as aggressive with taxing retirement plans as the rest of the European nations are. So that's something worth looking at. And of course, Malta is always winning the medal for being built from the ground up to be a haven for people trying to get low taxes. Residency requirements and programs. Now, if you haven't started on this, you better start on this, especially if you want to do the golden visa in Spain, because in April, Spain has joined in with the rest of the golden visa haters. Spain's done too. So Spain is no longer offering the golden visa option as soon as this gets voted into law. So we don't know if this is going to happen this year, not yet. But I was just talking with a tax advisor an hour ago who is in Amsterdam, and he's moving to Spain. And he said, I'm doing this now. I want to do the golden visa because I don't know if it's going to be long for this world. So they're doing away with the golden visa. And then they have something that's called the non-lucrative visa. That is the retirement visa for Spain. And that allows you, as long as you have the passive income requirement met, which is 28,000 euros for Spain, to basically get your residency visa in Spain. And then in Portugal, you have the good old D7. D7 being one of a number of serial Ds. That didn't sound right. But the D7 in Portugal, it's basically the same as what we just described, the non-lucrative. That's the retirement visa. So as long as you have enough income coming to you, this is going to be your guy. And the golden visa, similar. to, you know what? This is an old slide. Look at this. This is how quickly things are changing. Portugal offers a golden visa for those who invest in real estate. That's not true anymore. I thought I deleted this. The golden visa option in Portugal is only available to you if you're willing to invest in one of the many state-approved venture funds. So you must place a sort of naked vote of faith, a 500,000 euro investment. Well, it's got approval from the local SEC equivalent, but it's still going to be it's a pretty big matzo ball to put out there just to get a visa. In case you will find it useful, here are your steps to qualify for long-term residency. I won't go through that process today. And here are the benefits of the Golden Visa programs. There's where I made my edits. The only thing to say here with the Golden Visa programs is the number one reason that you should be choosing the Golden Visa is, of course, number one, you can afford to say goodbye to a certain amount of money for several years. Most of these Golden Visa approved funds in Portugal, as well as some of those that are available in Spain, they're tailored to take the same amount of time as the entire immigration process, which we can cue the joke for how long that might take, given the administrative backup that is currently being experienced in Portugal. But anyways, the benefit is that you don't need to stay in the country more than half the year. If you're on the D7 visa, you are essentially stuck living in Portugal all the time, about half the year. So you better be ready for that. And Spain is going to take you twice as long. The immigration process to become a citizen, a naturalized citizen, is 5 years in Portugal, plus the administrative time. And Spain is one decade. So that's something to be aware of as you think about these programs in these two countries. The process for obtaining the golden visa in these countries is very similar to achieving the residency, although it's actually even harder in a way because the pool of applicants is so small. They've also chosen to make the administrative core that's there to serve you small, and so any backup can become a big backup very quickly, like a single lane highway. So that was actually pretty fast. I got through this faster than I expected to, and so hopefully we have some good Q&A. The pros and cons, as I've put up there, it's so hard. This is not like, well, it will become a YouTube video, but I hate how we try and boil things down, don't we, into this one or that one. They're both amazing countries to live in. I landed in Portugal, but I might just as well have landed in Spain. It's got beautiful weather. Spanish, I think, is just a little bit easier than meu português, and the cost of living is fairly even between the two countries. Um, Again, advantages and disadvantages of retiring to each of these countries. I could tell you so many conversations I've had where people decide for Spain or they decide for Portugal. It really just comes down to the subjective experience. I find Portugal better because I lived in the Midwest as a child, and I kind of like that the Portuguese seem mm, a bit more modest and a bit more compassionate, overtly. And the Spanish that remember that chicken saying "ole." They're just a little bit more Antonio Banderas, a little bit more more spicy, which is pretty cool given your mood as well. Um, so here, this is basically what I've been talking about. You are going to have to decide for you how you feel about these various things, and whichever you should choose, I think that you're going to be in a fantastic place. But if you can, do it pre-move. Do it as soon as you can before you decide to make the move, so that you can make some decisions about how to maybe reshuffle the deck. I'm thinking your retirement accounts. I'm continuing to make progress on creating a sort of uh, bolt action plan on that, but we know that you can do a lot before you get to the acclimatization phase and to global financial integration to get your ducks in a row. Working with financial advisors, in case you don't know, is, I think, so easy. But come to talk with me, really, if you want to do that. And that's us. We're done. I'm going to head through the Q&A where we currently have a couple of questions, and then we will go away for today. So, all right, we answered that. There was just a few funny comments in the questions and answer, which I just love. And okay, for buying and renting in Portugal, does it make sense to take out a mortgage rather than buying cash if you can afford the latter? If intending to be in Portugal for 6 to 7 years for citizenship, but maybe not later. Well, thank you, Stephen. I actually always look at this the same way that all financial planners do. Number one, what's the rate? Can you get a 3% rate to borrow that money? If you can get 3 or 4%, then I think it's a no-brainer. I was just reinvesting somebody's bond portfolio an hour ago, hour and a half, right before the call. And I went, oh, we should buy some new 6-month bonds. And they're yielding 5.4% right now. So if you can borrow at 4% and you can keep a tidy book and borrow for 5%, then you're making money. So that gives you liquidity. So I always think that you should borrow if it's constructive borrowing, but once it gets overly expensive, or if you're buying into a variable rate mortgage, which is actually the preference in Portugal, so stay away from those variable rate mortgages. They will suck you down if interest rates turn against us. But yeah, I think you should pretty much always buy. You should always borrow if you can. No wealth tax in Andalusia either, but now there is a type of wealth tax countrywide for assets over 3 million. That, Gary, is an awesome point. And Gary makes the broader point that the wealth tax existence is almost always changing. And if you want to, when you email me later, I'm happy to share with you some of these documents that I have taken a lot of time to. Oh, I still am screen sharing. So here was a really interesting document where you can see the conversation being had by the fiscal governors of Spain on the various autonomous communities, and they're all basically making decisions in real time on, you know, putting on new levels of wealth tax, pulling them back, offering tax stimulus. Just like any of us that lives in the United States, it is not a foregone conclusion that these will always be exactly the same. So you really have to kind of love the place that you're moving to, choose that place for the circumstances now, but be prepared to pay additional taxes should the local government decide to move them up. In Spain, Andalusia has no wealth tax as well. Okay, yeah, somebody. So yeah, Andalusia and some of the other islands, I think, have no wealth tax in addition to Madrid. So Stephen says, for the Spain Golden Visa, 5-year citizenship version exists. Is multiple citizenship is still prohibited, i.e., a U.S. citizen would need to give up U.S. citizenship with a U.S. exit tax that entails. That's a great question, Stephen. I don't know the answer to that. But let's just say this. If you are considering expatriating, Stephen brings up an excellent point. There's some serious cons there. There's some downsides to expatriation, and the one that he's pointing out is that there will be a U.S. exit tax, meaning that if you're going to say goodbye to your U.S. to your U.S. passport, you're gonna immediately have to pay for capital gains on assets that are beyond a certain threshold. And that threshold is a little bit high, but that will be a subject that we can leave for another day because I have that in a calculator here. And I don't remember what the number is exactly, but it is a thing. Now there is some pros, of course, to leaving the United States, and that would be if you had a large crypto portfolio. I met a gentleman from Spain recently that had been a contractor in the United States and just given up his green card. And I said, great, because if you are a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, you're basically reporting home to the U.S. every year. You can't get away from being a U.S. tax citizen. They just assume that you're going to be coming home someday, and so so you're stuck with it. But what was I saying? Oh, the pros are if you're not a U.S. citizen, then you can just be a tax resident in whatever country that you're currently living in. And so the UK actually has had this rule up until recently, where there's a domiciliary rule that they're dropping, and people love living in the UK and having assets elsewhere because you're not being taxed for those assets that you held elsewhere, and you're not being taxed in both countries. So you can do a lot of things with your tax residency to avoid paying higher taxes by having assets in another place like Malta, and then not living there. Um, and okay, we have another question there. I'll just send a response to. Okay, in Portugal, is the Golden Visa investments and funds relatively risky or is it safe? That's an awesome question, George. And so I'm actually meeting with a securities lawyer tomorrow to discuss some of the details regarding the CMVM, which is the Portuguese version of the SEC. And why is that important? Well, because if you're registered as an investment advisor with the European regulatory body, you've got to make sure that you've got everything above board, and we do. But the CMVM also regulates those investments. Okay, so just like the US SEC, you can't buy into even a sort of speculative real estate investment without the SEC at least blessing that the company itself is financially secure. And so how they do that in Portugal is there is usually a sort of two funds that you're working with when you work with a Golden Visa investment. And one of the funds is kind of like a custodial fund. So there is a company called Oxy Capital in Portugal that is probably one of like the big four sort of investment bank funds, and they provide the sort of liquidity for the instrument so that the manager of the fund doesn't take on any of the financial responsibility, because you can imagine if you just have a regular team of people that don't have a lot of finances, that's where financial chicanery usually happens anywhere. So when people get tempted to do something with the money. So there's usually like a custodial entity that holds the funds, and then you have your management team that's managing the Golden Visa approved fund for you. So that does, and then the CMVM is overseeing the whole investment. So, and they get audits and things of that nature. If you are already a resident in Portugal with the D7 and you have NHR, does that help equalize the tax disparity? So that question is an NHR question. And generally, any questions that start with, does it help to have the NHR for this, this, or this? Answer is usually yes, because the Portuguese NHR was a great instrument that just made it so that you're not paying over 20% for your foreign income. A lot of your foreign income is free. Even your Portuguese income could be received by you at a lower rate. So then because you're in the US as well, you're basically paying for both of those. You're paying both of those countries, but you're getting topped up to the higher of the two. So with the NHR, you're usually paying less in Portugal, and you take all of those taxes that you pay in Portugal as a credit against your US taxes, thereby nullifying the overlap. Hopefully I answered that right. If my spouse has an EU citizenship or a passport, how easy is it to get residency in Portugal? Super easy. That was the case for so many of my clients that I work with. Is they do what's called a reunification visa, and hopefully there's enough people in the room that a few people hit the roof when I said it's easy, because nothing is easy from a bureaucratic standpoint. But you're not going to get like kicked out of the country by the Portuguese immigration controls people while you're waiting for your appointment so that you can be reunified to your EU citizen spouse. So yeah, it's fairly straightforward, has been my experience. Ah, Kim, hi, how are you? Kim asks, I would love to see a comparison with France and all these factors for retirees. I've done it. It's just there haven't been enough people asking for it. So come talk with me one-on-one sometime. We can get a coffee and compare France to all these other factors. Sean says, I've had different advice on buying ETFs while living in Portugal. I have accounts that have a US address, and he lives in Porto. I can't buy ETFs, but I can sell them. Can you clarify the rules on this? Which side is saying no, US or Portugal? Well, really, Sean, so Sean's question is, there is a sort of ban, it's a soft ban on buying US investment products. Why do I say it's a soft ban? Like a lot of things, it depends. So I'll give you the actual ruling. So the EU is the bad guy here. So the European Union um, Office for Financial Innovation, I think they're called, the EU, created a rule that says that you can't purchase investment products that are manufactured, offered from another country if certain sales literature is not provided. Well, the U.S. fund industry as a collective basically said, yeah, we're not going to go along with that. And so the European Financial Commission said, okay, well, nobody that's a tax resident in the Eurozone can buy mutual funds, ETFs. I'm not sure, but I think index funds may fall into this as well. And the reason for that is, well, I just described. And so you can't buy new positions if you're a tax resident in the EU. Now, the advice that Sean got, uh, it was sort of rogue advice. I mean, it's the way things are done versus the way that things ought to be. Is there are a wide swath of Americans who are not registering their address, their new address, with their U.S. custodians. It's a don't ask, don't tell solution, and so it's not a perfect solution. If there were some form of audit that were done, then they might catch you in their dragnet. And I have met a lot of people who are saying that there's an effort to do this. They're going to be starting to log IPs and things of that nature, but I've never actually seen it happen. And the person that would be penalized in the unlikely event that you got in trouble for this would be the custodian, which is why they're responsible for finding out where you live. And if you register honestly with them, then you'll have to deal with their international arm. And so Charles Schwab, for example, our custodian of choice, they have an international entity which will still serve you in every way except for that way. They won't buy U.S. financial instruments for you. Um, Anyways, that was a long answer. Sorry, everyone else. Ray asks, in Portugal, are your taxable earnings, either pension or dividends, only taxed at half the total for married couples? Yeah, that is actually how that works. So Ray's question speaks to the way that joint households are considered when you're taxed. And that is that they basically take all of your earnings and they just cut them in half. So if you make $100,000 and your spouse makes no money, that $100,000 is going to be sliced in half, and you will have two people making $50,000 going through the Portuguese tax system. Hopefully that answers that elegantly as possible. Elisa says, I would be interested in France also. I'm also interested in France, and I'm going to be living there for the next 2 weeks. That's fun. Yeah, I have a friend who lives in France, and I said, yeah, I can move my office there for 2 weeks. Who doesn't want to do that? This guy does. And so that's me. We don't have any more open questions, I think. I think all of our questions have been answered. So that is it, ladies and gentlemen. If I seem tired, it's because it has been all kinds of hot here in Portugal for the last week, and that can be a bit of a drag. It's a bit cansativo, as the Portuguese would say, but you've been great. Thank you, thank you, thank you. For those of you that are still with me, I will be signing off now. Don't forget to ask me for the slides if you want them. I'm a reader, so whenever I join these things, I actually watch them when they're recorded, and I ask for those slides, which I will happily do for you. But other than that, if we're a friend, if you're a client, if we know each other for some other reason, good to see you again. If we haven't met in person, please drop me a line sometime. And this is John McNertney with Green Ocean Global Advisors in Portugal, hoje, signing out. Grande abraço. Take good care. Bye-bye.